You are listening to the Political Periscope, a weekly podcast brought to you by Radio WNET. Interviews on international politics, security, geopolitics, economy, and more. Every Thursday at 7 p.m.
Today's guest of the Political Periscope is Emil Anton, Doctor of Theology and journalist of Vatican News Suomi.
Political Periscope.
You're in Vatican right now, and you've been to the funeral of the Benedict XVI.
Yes, actually, at the moment I am in Rome. I'm just back from the Vatican. I am in Villa Lante, which is a beautiful Renaissance villa on the Gianicolo Hill. And we have wonderful views from here to the Vatican St. Peter's Church. This is the Finnish embassy to the Holy See, and it is also a residence for Finnish scholars. And I am staying here for a week to cover the funeral of Pope Benedict and also to finish a book project on Rome, guide book to Rome for pilgrims. So those are two projects I'm working with here in Rome during this week.
And what can you say about the funeral? How was it? How was the ambience? How many people were there?
Well, I just read now on the way back just a Finnish news article that said 60,000, which seemed very little to me. I would have said that it was more, but I don't really have any official competence or proof. But I have to say it was less than I thought. I thought it would be more full of people. So the St. Peter's Square was not full. It was not like John Paul II, like the crazy Poles who put their tents on the streets. The Germans are not pious like the Poles. So it was less, but actually there were some Polish people there with their banners. And but let's say the atmosphere was very nice, happy mostly. Of course, also very kind of devout and respectful. So it was not like a carnival. They asked people not to put up like banners or flags. At the end, they did, some of them. But generally, it was kind of low-key, as Pope Benedict himself wanted it to be, like modest, not too much of a party celebration, but kind of humble, modest celebration. But I think mostly still like with a deep joy, gratitude, and happiness that he has reached his goal. And at the same time, what was the most wonderful for me was just the experience of the universality of the Catholic family, like all the time in front of me going priests from Africa or nuns from Asia or, Poles, Spaniards, Italians, whatnot. And I could speak a lot of languages and just enjoy that I'm part of a universal family.
This funeral was quite exceptional. It's not the first time, but one of the 3 times in the history when the Pope Emeritus dies. So how different was it from normal papal funeral?
Well, I have never been to any papal funeral before, so I don't have any personal experience. And in general, I would say that papal funerals are rare in any case. They're like, for most people, once in a lifetime experiences. Actually, now there was some talk that who knows, maybe there will be a next papal funeral quite soon because of Pope Francis' condition. So who knows? But just on the technical level, the prayers were a little bit different. Like it's a different situation when the Pope dies and there's still a Pope. So it's not like sede vacante. So they had to change some of the liturgy to tone it down a bit. But mostly it was similar to a papal burial.
Pope Benedict XVI is considered today quite conservative, especially in relation to Pope Francis. What do you think about it? Was he really as conservative as it is often presented, or maybe not?
Yeah, I really don't like this way of presenting him. First of all, because when the modern media says conservative, usually they think about 1 or 2 issues related to sexual matters or something like that. But there are like a million issues in the world, and you would have to look at Pope Benedict more widely than from this very narrow perspective of a few select favorite issues of the liberal West, let's say. If you look at Pope Benedict's youth, he was a very progressive theologian at the Second Vatican Council. So he was one of the main forces behind the Catholic Church's renewal to look differently at the modern world, at other Christians, at other religions. So the Vatican Council changed the Catholic Church's attitude toward other Christians, other religions, and the modern world to a more dialogical approach instead of a condemnatory approach. So Pope Benedict was very much behind that, and he stayed, Joseph Ratzinger, that time young theologian, he stayed faithful to his vision. He was always a very open thinker. I have done my doctorate on his theology of religions and interreligious dialogue, and I was very surprised at how open he was. For example, already in the 50s, even before the Second Vatican Council, he said that we just simply cannot believe that all Muslims go to hell, which was a normal attitude at that time, that outside the Catholic Church, everybody goes to hell. But Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger, he said already in the 50s that this is just impossible to believe. And he kind of developed a very open theology of salvation, where he's very optimistic that the majority of men will in the end be saved. Of course, he develops his theology of purgatory to kind of deal with the problem. But anyway, there are many issues in which he was very much an open thinker. Even actually in sexual morals, if you look at his interview books, he's asked about contraception. And you will be surprised how pastoral and how flexible he is. Of course, on the theoretical level and on the level of principles, he's quite firm. But, when Peter Sewald, the German journalist, asked him if, we have a married couple, they have this amount of children, and they decide, okay, they end up using contraception, then should they think that they are bad Catholics? And Joseph Ratzinger says, no. And he says, these are not matters that you can just decide on a theoretical level. You should talk to the confessor and things like that. So just some examples that he's actually a much more open thinker than what the short media presentations portray him as.
Also, one of the topic that's very different from, I could call it conservative agenda, is the suggestion that maybe there should be some global level governance body over the economy, the global economy. He wrote it in one of his encyclics. He wrote that there is probably need for something like this to make the economy more fair, to help people in need, to redistribute the goods.
That is probably Caritas in Veritate, his social encyclical. But I have to admit that it's completely outside of my competence. So I am a theologian, a dogmatic theologian. So these kind of social and financial issues are completely out of my competence. But I'm sure it doesn't sound wrong to me. So you might well be right about that. Yeah.
Okay. So you said he put forward this idea that not only Catholics, not only Christians will go to heaven. And how was his Christianity dialogue with Orthodox Church, with Protestants?
Yes, he was a very important theologian in both dialogues. So first of all, he was German, so he knew Martin Luther better than most popes or most Catholics in history. So he really knew Protestant theology quite well, especially German Protestant theology, and he engaged it in many of his books. And actually, he liked Luther personally, not everything he said, but the fact that Luther was a theologian who really took theology seriously as a struggle with God. Because nowadays, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with academic theology. If you study theology in universities, it's not really a religious business. It's a science in many universities in Germany and Finland, also where I come from. It's kind of like a science that has nothing to do really with the supernatural. You just kind of study old texts and what different people thought and so on. So it's like a really secular thing. But for Benedict, that was wrong. And he thought that theology is about inquiring after the rationality of the faith. So he really liked Luther, because for Luther, theology was really an existential struggle with God. So he sympathized with him, and he sympathized with some of his basic discoveries, like the mercy of God. So that salvation, for example, is not something we earn with our good works, but something that we receive as a gift. And then, of course, we enter into that life of God actively as well. Then with the Orthodox, he suggested that we should not require from the Orthodox anything that was not believed in the first millennium. So that's pretty strong, because we have had many dogmas pronounced after the first millennium, after the split. But he said that if we are going to unite, we should not require of them anything that was not defined in the first millennium. So that was something kind of progressive that he suggested. Of course, the dialogue is still going on, and we hope for full communion. He realized that it's very difficult on this side of history to reach this full communion. But he had some very close Orthodox friends as well, and a very close relations with the Orthodox Patriarch, as does Pope Francis now. So in general, I think the relations, the ecumenical dialogue went forward, although there are some cases where, again, public opinion says that it went backwards on some particular cases. But in general, he was, for example, the one who negotiated the joint declaration on justification or salvation with the Lutherans. So he saved that document. So I think he was very important in ecumenical dialogues as well as interreligious dialogues.
Speaking about Germany, I've seen this video from many years ago when Pope Benedict was in Germany greeting German bishops, and some of them didn't want to shake his hand. He was quite controversial among German bishops, for example, but also among Polish clergy.
Yes. Now I'm trying to remember that video, that maybe I saw some kind of refutation that it wasn't because they refused, but maybe it was for some other reason, whether it was some kind of sanitary or health reason that they didn't want to greet or something. I'm not sure about the video, but it's true that in general, in Germany, he's very controversial, quite negatively perceived. I have heard stories of people having their doctoral dissertations rejected just because they quote Ratzinger even once. So you mention his name and your doctorate is rejected, or your promoter, your supervisor says you have to take this quote out. So he's very much a persona non grata in German universities, which are much more liberal. And even I was on a kind of a Ratzinger pilgrimage in his hometowns when his birthday that last April, and I found that there's none of his books are being sold. Nobody's read them. So it's quite interesting. It's like not a prophet in his own land. Tough luck. It was like since the 60s, Hans Küng, the liberal theologian, became like a favorite of the media, and he controlled the media and made the liberal public opinion to be against Ratzinger. So I think that was a big influence behind it.
Pope Benedict kind of reintroduced or gave a bit more space for traditional liturgy, for Trident liturgy. Now Pope Francis seems to be quite reserved towards it. Do you think those traditional circles inside of the church will accept it and will give up on Trident liturgy, or will there be some kind of conflict?
Yeah, this is a difficult question from already the decades after the Second Vatican Council, the Lefebvrist schism and the rejection of the new Mass, and then Pope John Paul II's attempt to save parts of these people and creating the Society of St. Peter. Then when Pope Benedict, who was always against forbidding the Old Mass, allowed then the Old Mass again, then especially in the United States, it spread a lot, and a lot of parishes just turned like this overnight to become very radically traditionalist and kind of denying the Second Vatican Council. So now, after this changed situation, Pope Francis needed to do something about it. it's not clear if he did the best thing because, many groups will probably fight against it. Some people will, of course, obey and others will not. I'm sure Pope Benedict suffered because of this change, because their preferences were different in this case. But it remains to be seen. It's true that Pope Benedict had a kind of sympathy for the traditionalist. He really loved the old liturgy, beautiful liturgy he had grown up with in Baroque Bavaria. So if you read his work, The Spirit of the Liturgy, you can see his thinking on the importance of the beauty of the liturgy, not like, rock masses or something like that. But other people have other preferences. But it remains to be seen. It's still kind of an open question. But I think it's mostly something that touches like American circles in the first place. I don't think it's that big outside of there.
You yourself, you have very, I would say, unusual background for a devout Catholic, because your father is from Iraq. You grew up in Finland, which is mostly Protestant country, with a very small minority of Catholics. So how did it happen, and what brought you to Catholic Church?
Yeah, thank you for the question. My father is indeed from the Catholic minority of Iraq, and it is a very old Christian minority. The Christian church there is basically as old as Christianity. It is really there from the first centuries, and in the villages they speak Aramaic, Jesus' language. And in the cities they speak Arabic already. They were maybe half of the population by the time Islam came there, but then it went down and down as Islam was getting stronger throughout the centuries. So my father was from this minority of Eastern Catholics from Iraq, and he came to Finland because he had fallen in love with my mother, my Finnish mother, in England. And one of his requests was that the children would be baptized in the Catholic Church because he could bring almost nothing from his culture to Finland with him. And we were growing up in a very Finnish environment otherwise. So my mother agreed, and so I was baptized in the Catholic Church. We are at the moment 16,000 people, which is 0.3% of the population in Finland. Of course, minorities are usually a good place to practice religion, especially for Christians, that Christianity started as a minority, and it is, we can say, at most at home as a minority. It is stronger as a minority. I think the identity is more clear. So that's what my context is. Of course, the Lutheran Church in Finland is one of the most Catholic Lutheran churches, or one of the most Catholic Protestant churches. It is kind of a historical church with bishops and sacraments, and very ecumenical, so very positive, very open, very friendly to the Catholic Church. Of course, more liberal for sure, except that there are also some traditionalist movements inside the Lutheran Church who are close to the Catholic Church for other reasons, like they reject women priests or same-sex marriage or something like that. So anyway, the relations are very good in Finland in general with the other Christians. So I found it a very nice, very good environment, fruitful and inspiring environment to be a Catholic.
So let's sum up with a question about Pope Benedict in Finland. What was thought on, or what is thought about him in Finland?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's very different depending on the circles. So if you look at the mainstream media, of course, it has been predominantly negative. So the typical story is, okay, Pope Benedict resigned or he died. He was known for the sexual abuse scandals and for being very conservative because he didn't accept the same-sex unions. And then that's the end of the story. So that's all they say about Pope Benedict. And that's like the general report on any pope. Well, maybe different now with Pope Francis. But then if you look at the Lutheran circles, it's very interesting and even kind of a historic change that happened when Pope Benedict published his books on Jesus of Nazareth. So there is this Finnish movement of Lutherans called Neo-Pietists who are traditionally very anti-Catholic. So they were the most anti-Catholic movement in the Lutheran Church, and very anti-ecumenical, and thinking that the union with Rome is something like the apocalypse and the horror of Babylon and things like that. And now, when they read Pope Benedict's books about Jesus, this movement that used to be anti-Catholic, they have translated and published these books. So some of their people said, like, how can we be publishing the Pope's books? And the leader said, well, go ahead and read the book. And if the Lutheran bishops wrote so well about Jesus, we would publish their books. But since the Pope writes about Jesus so much better than the Lutheran bishops, we publish this book. So that is something that made Pope Benedict's theology very well known in Lutheran circles and very well liked. Many people have said that he's like a Lutheran Pope because he uses the Bible a lot. He's really Bible-centered and Jesus-centered. And this is what brings the Lutherans and Catholics together, to be Christocentric and Bible-centric.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was the Political Periscope. The podcast is released every Thursday at 7 p.m.